Okay, everyone, welcome to the making of the Pittsburgh Tarot, a Gilded Age deck. Every tarot card tells a story, and our next speaker is the storyteller behind the deck. Please join me in welcoming to discuss the journey of bringing the Pittsburgh Tarot, a Gilded Age deck to life, Ed Simon. Ed Simon is Public Humanities Special Faculty in English at Carnegie Mellon University, the founding editor of the Pittsburgh Review of Books, and a widely published writer. He is the author of numerous books, including An Alternative History of Pittsburgh, Pandemonium, A Visual History of Demonology, and Devil's Contract, The History of Faustian Bargain, named one of 50 best books of 2024 by The New Yorker. So I will hand it over to Ed.
Thank you. Just got to get this on my lapel. The pocket. Thank you so much for coming out, everybody. So what I'm going to do for today is I actually wrote in addition to doing the art direction for the tarot deck itself. I did not do the actual illustrations, and I'll talk about that during my presentation. But I also wrote a guide to the tarot deck. It has an introduction and then explanations of each one of the cards. So what I'd like to do for you today then is to read from that introduction. And as I read, I'm going to show you some images from the cards themselves at appropriate points. So the title of the introduction itself is The Spirits Are of the Ground. The year after the end of the Civil War, the assorted oil men of Pennsylvania, highly regarded engineers and geologists, drillers and miners, were humbled by a clairvoyant speculator named Abraham James. That was the year that James discovered that a farmer's field in Venango County, which was assumed to be mineralogically fallow, contained millions of barrels of petroleum. James, the son of Quakers, was a spiritualist medium who made his fortune during the California gold rush by using divination, psychic seeing, and spirit contacting to unearth subterranean veins of wealth. In his 1873 book, The Early and Later History of Petroleum, J.T. Henry compared James in Venango to Saul on the road to Damascus, while Harry Botsford in the Valley of Oil anointed the medium the status of Hebrew prophet. When the New York Times published its obituary of James in 1884, it compared his work at identifying wells not just in terms of American manifest destiny, but almost as a mystical theophany. The obituary describes how the earth opened and an immense cavern yawned before them, where the spirit brought James to the margin of a lake of petroleum of unknown depth and extent, where even after the vision dissipated and before the drill could get to work, the seer had been granted the promise of a boundless store of wealth, an American heaven. Beginning in 1859, when the first oil drill in the world struck black gold in the Allegheny Mountains, Western Pennsylvania experienced an economic boon as the black liquid squirted forth from Titusville to the appropriately named Oil City. The crude was transformed into kerosene in the refineries of Pittsburgh in order to light lamps from the shores of New York Harbor to the San Francisco Bay. For 3 decades, Western Pennsylvania, already rich from coal, would accumulate even more wealth from the drilling and refinement of petroleum that had laid dormant beneath the Earth's crust for hundreds of millions of years. The desiccated liquid remains of those creatures of the Devonian period who'd once sculpted this landscape when it was a tropical paradise. The birthplace of the oil industry. Pennsylvania was the first Texas, the first Saudi Arabia, but not for the farmer George Porter and his presumed anemic land near Pleasantville, some 100 miles north of Pittsburgh. A spare, slight, slender, and modest man, effete if not effeminate, the gentle countenance James was singular among the roughneck oilmen of the boom years. His psychic vocation was more apt for those spiritualist drawing rooms that proliferated in the 19th century, summoning knocking souls from the hereafter at seances and in trances. Spiritualism, that quasi-Christian faith that held to the medium's ability to contact those who had departed this earthly realm, helped mourning parents to contact children lost at Gettysburg, and antietam, or aided editors in connecting with sage personages of the past, from Shakespeare to George Washington. James' interests, on the other hand, were wholly more practical, which is to say, lucrative. Most spiritualists searched for ghostly ectoplasm, but James's fluid was oil. While surveying Potter's Field alongside two other men, James was suddenly struck into a convulsive fit, what his associate J.M. Peebles described 2 years later as being in the body or out, whereby, quote, Indian spirits controlled his body mechanically, while wisdom spirits induced the trance condition. Suddenly, the medium pulled out a worn copper penny that he had used as a scrying tool for divination. He twisted about and fell to the green-grassed, frosted ground of Venango on that Halloween day in 1866 and declared that a drill should be assembled directly on that spot. So was established the first harmonial well, named for the occult philosophy that defined James's eccentric method. From Potter's Field at its height, the harmonial well would produce around 100 barrels of oil a day, making the farmer and James rich men. James and the harmonial wells have largely disappeared from the historical record, writes literary scholar Rachel Ranieri-Zuck in the Journal of American Studies. She continues, despite scientific innovation and revisionist history, the oil industry still bears traces of its psychometric past and must contend with the ways in which its future is dependent on successfully channeling the unseen, end quote. Not just the oil industry, I would argue, but those other technocratic marvels that made Pittsburgh and her countryside the veritable forge and kiln of Gilded Age America. The coal studded through those veins of the earth, the very name conjuring the potency of blood. The iron transformed into steel as if the alchemist's dream of the philosopher's stone had been accomplished by a Bessemer converter. The raw silica sand rendered into glass, as clear as a scrying mirror, and eventually the computers and robots that would be assembled in the shells of old mills, these novel devices as if the oracles and brazen heads of medieval legend. For all those past epochs' reputations for theurgy, medieval alchemists and Renaissance magicians with their cunning incantations and conjurations, the industrial and technological revolutions finally saw humanity's apotheosis in being able to manipulate unseen forces to unleash tremendous power, to master the earth and water, the heavens and fire in the pursuit of tremendous prosperity and environmental devastation in the process. In the history of occultism, medieval hermeticists had the winding, cobblestone streets of Salamanca, and Renaissance magicians had red-roofed tiled Prague. But during the most potent of eras, the wizards of the Industrial Revolution had smoke-stacked and mill-lined, smoggy, smoky, filthy, and beautiful Pittsburgh. If there was a religion of modernity for good and very often for evil, it's industrial capitalism. And technology is that church's sacrament. Her Jerusalem is at the forks of the Ohio. Joel Haar and Edward Muller, in Making Industrial Pittsburgh, Environment, Landscape, Transportation, and Planning, described the city during the period of its greatest power as being an industrial juggernaut, explaining that manufacturing also grew in other cities, but none matched the extensive complex of iron, steel, and allied metals, industries that became the hallmark of the Steel City, along with its trademark of black smoke. That noxious atmosphere, like a spectral chimera, is the least of the connections between magic and industry. For all of those alchemical dreams, people in centuries past couldn't have imagined the world forged in the fiery kiln of Pittsburgh, the steel that undergirded skyscraper and bridge, the gasoline that powered automobiles, and the coal whose immolation made this nation comfortable and prosperous, though all of that came with rising shorelines and mercury levels. Centuries immemorial saw European miners, whether among the coal hills of Wales or the silver mines of Germany, speaking of odd spirits deep beneath the ground, of goblins and gremlins whose animate power was to be simultaneously harnessed and feared. In Germany, for example, there was the so-called kobold, a chthonic demon who resided deep within the mines, and incidentally gave cobalt its name. Eccentric and superstitious as such beliefs may seem to us in our supposedly enlightened age, what term other than magic can describe the extractive logic of coal mining and oil drilling, in which the remains of formerly animate creatures from millions of years ago are sacrificed again to release energy, both limitless and dangerous? And if the Gilded Age of Pittsburgh was, as I think is obvious, a period of necromancers and wizards gestating our modern world as if a homunculus, then in that spirit, what's more appropriate in both its danger and promise than a divinatory tool such as the tarot deck? To that end, a Pittsburgh Tarot that takes the enchanted magic of the place seriously, where the spirits are of the very ground and are conjured by miners and incantated by mill workers, deserves a visual rhetoric and a symbolic language that goes beyond the typical black and gold or the use of Pittsburgh stereotypes like fries on sandwiches. Such tropes, and there is much that I, as a native-born son, love about them, are at best nostalgia and at worst kitsch. What we're attempting in the Pittsburgh Tarot is something different. As Edward Muller and Rob Ruck write in Pittsburgh Rising, From Frontier Town to Steel City, 1750 to 1920, this was a metropolis elevated from a remote colonial outpost into a national powerhouse only a half century after its founding in 1758. Those are the rough but not exclusive contours of the years this deck memorializes, that period when the magic of science and technology, industry and capitalism transformed the very contours of the earth alongside the more potent theurgy of labor and solidarity, which challenged that aforementioned dark faith. The result is a very different sort of Pittsburgh product, a wry, ironic, winking, and still deeply serious consideration of the ways in which this city at a particular place and time embodied the seemingly divine power that extracted nature's entrails from the ground and forged them into something novel. A tarot deck involved in conjuring up the ghosts of that era, like James finding petroleum with a penny pressed to the earth. Now, during the dissolute twilight of our own era of the Anthropocene, it behooves us to identify technological industry as not just the productive application of empirical science, but as an occult method in its own right, which made so many things possible, but perhaps at tremendous cost. With the collective future in such doubt, we could use the tool for predicting what comes hence. Aiding me in that purpose, aiding is not nearly adequate enough of a word, is the artist and illustrator Steve Teare, a Philadelphia man, though I don't hold that against him. When conceiving of the Pittsburgh Tarot, my desire was for a deck that expressed the uncanny and the strange in the area of the Three Rivers, a deck both playful but slightly menacing. Steve, whose distinctive images remind me of everything from the mezzotint of an Albright Dürer to the golden age of American cartoons, which populated the smudge print newspapers of turn-of-the-century yellow journalism, was the perfect person to render these visions and translate my own shaky and often inchoate ideas into this deck. His illustrations and cartoons have appeared in the Nib and the New Yorker, in calendars and on posters, in prints and in private collections. An artist with a distinctive vision, the most important attribute an artist can have after talent, which Steve, of course, has in copious amounts, his style was the perfect match for what I conceived of as a sort of steampunk Gilded Age tarot deck. My desire was to see the Pittsburgh Tarot animated by a motivating philosophy and aesthetic, which are the same things for me anyhow, to express that which is commensurate with the charged, enchanted, and sometimes dangerous magic of the very land itself. In my book, The Soul of Pittsburgh, Essays in Life, Community, and History, I describe the individual spirit of place in the area as having the attributes of what I call the Allegheny Gothic, writing that this is a sensibility that is aware of history's hauntings, where libraries are built on graveyards and homes on slag heaps, so that we're more poetically haunted by the presence of not just those past peoples, but also that which motivated them, that which they believed in, and that which they suffered for. In that way, I view this tarot deck as not just a tool for divination, but also an essay. It's an argument about Pittsburgh, one that is endlessly changing, as apt to be shuffled as a deck of cards, as mercurial and mutable as the spirits themselves. Tarot itself became popular during the time period that our deck largely commemorates. Already a venerable practice, it was incorporated into the methodologies of the spiritualist mediums who enraptured millions of Americans during the Victorian era. And our own deck partially pays homage to the most celebrated tarot of that era, the Rider-Waite deck. With a history that can be traced back to the Italian Renaissance, perhaps first used as a means of encoding the esoteric teachings of Hermetic philosophies or heretical beliefs from groups like the Cathars, tarot quickly became a means of using randomness to see beyond the veil of mundane existence, to tap into the elemental and archetypal nature of reality. What tarot has to offer, far beyond the stereotype of the dime museum arabesque automaton printing out cards with magic numbers on them, or the vagaries of fortune cookie predictions, is fundamentally a form of literature, an aleatory literature, in which the author is something beyond our control, perhaps the god of fortune itself. Jessa Crispin writes in The Creative Tarot, a modern guide to an inspired life, that, quote, each reading is essentially a story. You lay out the cards, and there on the table you have the outline. You have the who, what, where, and when. Using the intuitive cues provided by the card's images, you fit your story into the story of the cards. A game, or a tool, or an oracle, or a story in which the person reading and the person who is being read aren't just a protagonist, where an entire city can be the main character, as well, or at least I'm hoping, as that's evident in this particular text. What I hope the Pittsburgh Tarot provides is an intimation of the material enchantments of the city, this odd magic where the spirits themselves are in the ground, where the land itself was haunted before people ever came here, maybe haunted by coal and oil, the vital remains of past creatures resurrected and dangerous still. Because in Pittsburgh, spiritualism and materialism can't help but be united, though maybe that's some of the Catholic immigrant physicality that animates this region. Far from being ethereal or otherworldly, tarot itself is built upon the charged nature power of matter. Certainly in the most prosaic sense, there are the cards, the actual physical printed cards, whose shuffling is supposed to gesture to those things in the beyond. But then there is what the cards represent, the way in which each suite of the minor arcana has always been a reference to those ancient four elements that were once believed to structure all of reality: fire, air, water, and earth. And so it is in the Pittsburgh Tarot. We explore the earth of neighborhoods, the air of nature, the water of our three rivers, and the fires of industry herself. Meanwhile, the major arcana and the royal cards of the minor arcana suites honor, and sometimes not, the personages both famed and regular, celebrated and infamous, that were responsible for the formation of Pittsburgh. Magic, like industry and technology, which are only a portion of magic itself, can be good or bad. It can be used to further progress and justice and freedom and equality, or to do the opposite. What the Pittsburgh Tarot is designed to do is to embody that complicated history, the tensions between nature and industry, labor and capital, freedom and authoritarianism, that have defined life in the city specifically and the nation of which it's a part more generally. To do that, to understand who we are and where we are going, requires an honest grappling with history. To do that, it's a voice from the heavens. To do that, to understand who we are and where we are going, requires an honest grappling with history. Strangely, tarot can be a tool to do this, a scrying device for peering into the future by acknowledging that which came before in all of its splendor and ugliness. The psychoanalyst Carl Jung said as much when in a 1933 lecture on tarot. He argued that we can predict the future when we know the present moment evolved from the past. In many ways, this is less esoteric than it first sounds. For Jung's point is only that there is no way to see towards where we're going without an awareness of where we've been. That this is sometimes a less than linear process, where reason isn't as important as emotion, intuition, and imagination, means the power of the tarot can become practical, as helpful as a magical penny pressed to the cold earth of a farm field with an ominous power dormant beneath it. Because the cards can present a truth as ancient and hidden as the very metals beneath our feet. Thank you.